Let's talk about Nikolai Gogol. Nope. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Let's Talk About. My name is Lisphage. Let's talk about Nikolai Gogol for like 5 seconds and then talk about his really cool story, A Terrible Vengeance or A Terrible Revenge. Terrible Vengeance, Terrible Revenge. We're gonna call it A Terrible Vengeance, because that sounds much better, don't it? Also, at the top, sorry for my pronunciation. I have never taken a Russian class, so I'll do my best, but that's all I can do. Alright, real quick. Gogol. What a guy. In essence, he was the quintessential Russian novelist. He solidified the Russian novel as we have it today, and he also pioneered a lot of interesting techniques for writing. A lot of his stories are particularly modern, considering that they were written almost 200 years ago. That being said, he's kind of a garbage boy. He did not have a lot of love for anyone that wasn't a Catholic Russian man or a Cossack. And it shows in his writing. So let's get into the actual story, A Terrible Vengeance. It's a wild ride, so buckle up. Gogol structures this story in 3 parts. It's very much like The Portrait, which is another story of his. So if you've read that, it has a similar structure. Gogol was not a structuralist, so I'm not sure if how this was done was intentional. It might have been just how he thought it best to tell the story. In the first third, he introduces a bunch of characters. About 2 of these characters matter at all. Then in the middle, the entire story happens. The 2 characters he picked at random from over here, bad stuff happens to him, there's your typical climax, denouement, and then a resolution. None of this makes sense. Over here, the last third is told in an entirely different place than these 2, and it explains exactly what happened in the middle third. So if you're confused while we're going through this, don't worry. This part will make it all make sense eventually. We begin in Kiev. Gorobetis, the captain of the Cossacks, is celebrating his son's wedding. He will never matter again, nor will his son. Let me just read you the guest list so you get an idea of what this part's like. Among others, the Dnieper Cossack Mitika came on his sorrel horse straight from a riotous orgy. So it's all like that. So after this, I have a theory. I think good old Gogol got a dart, and he put all the characters up on a dartboard, and he just went, whew, and he's like, that's my protagonist. In this instance, he hit Danilo and Katerina, and their infant son as well. He also is going to talk about the river Dnieper a lot. It's kind of like a through current for the story. So people are getting down, doing the Fortnite default dance or something, and then the captain brings out 2 icons to kind of bless the wedding, and this one old dude just don't stop flossing. And then he turns from a normal dude into a guy with green eyes, blue lips, a really long chin, and tusks. And people are like, it's the sorcerer, because apparently he's been a problem for a while. But it's weird. It's not like they're very concerned. They're just a little concerned, which will seem even stranger later on in the story. And the captain essentially just yells at him, get out of here! And he vanishes, cackling and hissing. Here, I'll demonstrate. So he's gone. People drink a bunch of Greek wine, and the rest of the night is fine. We cut to later that night. Gogol loves his jump cuts. It's basically like me or any other YouTuber. Danilo, Katrina, and their guards are floating peacefully down the river Dnieper in a boat carved out of an oak tree. Starlight and moonlight sparkles along the water. And then Danilo sees a castle, on the hill, with a graveyard in front of it, and he's like, isn't that the sorcerer's castle? It's never explained how he knows this. And then he's like, we should loot that graveyard, because that's where the sorcerer's ancestors are buried, and they had fat loot. And then 3 zombies rise from the grave. That's just a plot point. That just happens. There's 3 of them, each with longer beards and longer fingernails. One with fingernails spiking into the ground, like a piece of edgy deviant art. And they go, I'm stuck my friend. And they look like they're in a lot of pain. And then Danilo's like, maybe we should not loot the graveyard. And they go home. Now, through this whole thing, Danilo has been demeaning to Katerina and anti-Semitic, and I've just kind of left it out because it doesn't actually add anything to the story or our characterization. Danilo is consistently portrayed as the hero and kind of a manly paragon who tries to do the right thing. Gogol's just being nasty. That's just how he was. So anyway, they get back home. They live in a farmstead with a housekeeper, 10 Cossacks, and a ton of treasure. So Katerina's dad comes in and is like, where have you two been? I didn't know where you were. And Danilo instantly starts a fight with his father-in-law, calls him a poor Cossack, says he isn't religious. And they, of course, deal with this like reasonable, functioning adults, and they have a sword fight. It's cool, there's like several back and forth, like... Let me read you some of this. A terrible and even fight it was. Neither of the Cossacks was winning the day. At one moment, Katerina's father attacked and Danilo seemed to give way. Then Danilo attacked and the sullen father seemed to yield. And again they were equal. They boiled with rage. They swung their swords. Oh! It says, oh! That's how it's written. It just says, oh! Their swords clashed. And then, like in many a good anime, both of their swords break at the same time. At this point, Katerina is understandably relieved. Her husband has stopped trying to kill her father. One would think. So both men go running around the house to grab their muskets, as one does, and they both shoot at each other. Danilo misses, but Ivan hits Danilo in the arm. This injury is never mentioned or tended to ever again. But a little gunshot wound ain't gonna stop our boy Danilo, so he runs to grab his pistol. At this point, Katerina says, hey, maybe you shouldn't shoot my dad, and maybe you shouldn't, like, die, because we have a kid. And that would, like, kind of throw a wrench into our, like, life plan. So he agrees, they kiss, they make up, and go to bed. In the morning, Katerina tells Danilo about a strange dream she had about her father being a sorcerer and trying to force her to marry him. Foreshadowing! And Danilo says, yeah, this all makes sense. Your dad's kind of like a bad Cossack. I bet he is an evil sorcerer. And he yells for his servant boy to get him, and I quote, the Jew's mead so he can get drunk. He agrees with Katerina, but does not want to solve the problem or do anything about it. He wants to get drunk. So Ivan returns home for dinner, and Katerina is serving dumplings and pork. The father hates both of these dishes, and Danilo says he's an un-Cossack for not liking these staple foods. So everyone goes to bed, and Danilo sees a strange light in the top of the castle on the hill, and he calls his best friend Statesco to go get their weapons. Statesco has never been mentioned before. A brief aside, Gogol essentially does the opposite of a Chekhov's gun. Like a Gogolian whip, perhaps. Like, whenever he needs something for the story, he just kind of whoosh, just whoosh. Katerina requests that he lock her in her room in case she has the dream again while she's gone. What a solution. So he does, they leave, and he sees Ivan entering the castle and going up to that light. Who could have guessed? Danilo climbs a tree to get a good look at Ivan, who is the sorcerer casting an admittedly pretty cool spell. There's like swarms of bats and glowing runes around a cauldron. And anyway, he summons this ghostly apparition, which Danilo instantly figures out somehow is Katerina's soul, and Ivan's like trying to convince her to marry him just like the dream, and she says, I will never go along with your evil deeds, because whenever you do evil, you cause the dead to rise, i.e. the zombies. And she recalls that he murdered her mother, and then she looks exactly to where Danilo is standing and says, I will never betray my husband. Which is a nice moment. So he goes back, Katerina says she had the same dream, and Danilo says, I wish I never married you because your dad is an antichrist. Which is such a dick move. Especially after one of your loved ones declares undying allegiance to you. She then disowns her father and then says Danilo is her father in spirit. Which is also pretty weird. So here we have a time skip. Ivan is captured, he is in Danilo's basement, and the castle across the Dnieper is being burned down. So Katerina walks past Ivan's, like, containment cell, and he says, if you let me out, I promise I will repent. And Katerina, after everything she has experienced, thinks, this sounds reasonable. And she lets him out. which is a bad move. Her handmaid conceals the fact that Katerina let him out, so Danilo knows that Ivan has escaped, but not that Katerina did it. We then cut to a tavern of rowdy Poles. They decide to raid the homestead, and Danilo and his Cossacks manage to fend them off at great costs to both sides. The whole thing is described rather like a festival, which has some really good prose. And then the sorcerer kind of shows up with a gun, and he just no-scopes Danilo. And as he lays dying, he makes Tesco promise to take care of his wife and son. So he's dead. The sorcerer yeets out of there, and we cut to him casting a spell in a cauldron where a mysterious bearded face appears out of the mist and scares the sorcerer. We then cut to the surviving protagonists in Kiev. The son dies in his sleep, which we don't know how it happened, and Katerina is distraught. Now we cut to a sleeping knight riding his horse with a baby in his arms. The description basically says this knight is very cool. We have never seen this knight before. Just whoosh. We then cut back to Katerina. She has moved home, and heedless of the many phantasmagorical creatures roaming the nights, because that's just how Russia is, I guess, she is running around with a knife at night looking to stab her dad. No! Oh my God. Which, I mean, is a pretty fair reaction to, like, all of this. Like, that's fair. Then a stranger comes to the house. He learns of Danilo's death and is distraught. He tells of how they served together, what a close bond they formed. Through this, Katerina begins to come out of her insanity. She begins to see things clearly once again. And then the dude says, Danilo once told me that if he ever perished, he wanted me to marry his wife. And then Katerina is like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. It's my dad. Then she goes to stab him. He grabs the knife. He stabs her. He jumps on his horse and gets out of there. And no one stops him. And we cut to Kiev. The world has gone flat and people can see across the entire world in every direction. A massive apparition of the bearded man, which we then are told is the knight from earlier, appears massive above the mountains. The sorcerer then flees, recognizing the face from the smoke in his cauldron and another place, but we'll get to that later. And he gets on his horse, runs away, and the world kind of starts warping and twisting around him, very eldritch horror-like, and his horse turns its head and laughs at him with 2 rows of gleaming teeth, and he doesn't get off the horse, which I think most of us would have gotten off the horse. So the sorcerer is like, this is bad. I should probably do what I promised my daughter before I, shanked her and go and try to be a good person. And the people with the foremost knowledge about being good are, of course, monastic cave hermits. So he goes to the nearest one of those and is like, hey, can you help me be a good person? This does not turn out like the acclaimed TV series, The Good Place. The hermit says, dude, my Bible is literally bleeding from the word of God, so I think you're a little too bad. I don't think I can help you very much. And the sorcerer is like, oh man. And then he stabs the hermit a lot, and then he gets on his horse and leaves. So then he finds himself riding in circles, and the massive knight appears before him. His horse will not stop dragging him towards the knight. He should have gotten off the horse. The knight opens his eyes, and the sorcerer instantly dies. The knight reaches out a hand and lifts him into the air. His undead corpse sees zombies rising from every corner of the earth and rushing towards him. The knight once again laughs, drops him into a fissure in the earth as the dead jump and pile onto his corpse as it grows massive under the earth, causing earthquakes and the deaths of thousands. And that's the end of the second part. So now we cut to a town square where a bandor, also it's like a bard, is telling a fun story. He tells a tale of 2 brothers named Petro and Ivan. They were 2 bounty hunter brothers who always agreed to do everything together. They received a bounty from a king telling them to catch a man named Pasha, and they split up to catch him. Now Ivan completes the bounty, shares all the spoils with Petro, and everything's fine. So Petro is very jealous of Ivan's acclaim, and as they're riding along, Ivan on his horse, asleep, holding his baby, you get where this is going. Petro shoves Ivan off a cliff. Ivan managed to catch himself on a ledge, and there's the whole, long live the king moment. So Ivan's hanging there like, oh, you betrayed me. And Petro's like, yeah. And he pushes him into the abyss. and Ivan dies. So Ivan appears before God, and God says, "Yo, your brother sucks. What should I do to him?" And so Ivan's like, "Let it be, O Lord, that none of his descendants may be happy upon earth, that the last of his race may be the worst criminal that ever has been, and that at every crime he commits, his ancestors, unable to rest in their graves, and suffering torments unknown to the world of the living, should rise from the tomb, and that the Judas, Petro, should be unable to rise, and that hence he should suffer pain, all the more intense, that he should bite the earth like one possessed, and writhe in the ground in anguish. Let me, O Lord God, rise on my horse from the precipice to the highest peak of the mountains, and let him come to me, and I will throw him from that mountain into the deepest abyss, and let all his dead ancestors, wherever they lived in their lifetime, come from various parts of the earth to gnaw him for the sufferings he inflicted upon them, and let them gnaw him forever, and I shall rejoice looking at his sufferings. Let him lust to gnaw, but be forced to gnaw himself, and let his bones grow bigger and bigger as time goes on, so that the pain may be greater. Let that torture will be worse for him than any other, for there is no greater torture for a man than to long for vengeance and be unable to accomplish it." And God's like, I'll do that, but it was kind of messed up. So you and your son are going to have to ride on that horse forever. And Ivan is like, deal. And then the Bandor finishes his story, and everyone's kind of in shock, and that's the end. All in all, it really succeeds with very innovative horror elements and twists and foreshadowing that drives the tension upward and upward. The cuts are very cinematic and modern. It reads like an action movie. There is a reason people revere Gogol so highly as the father of Russian literature. But he was not a structuralist. When he wanted something to happen, it happened. Just whoosh! Very little organization, just a good story. Only he wasn't so bigoted. But yeah, that's A Terrible Vengeance by Gogol. It's a really interesting story that taught me a lot about writing. I'm lmao. Thank you so much for watching. Love ya. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe here, and please follow and subscribe to me on Twitch, twitch.tv/lmao, in the description below, along with all of my other social media channels.